Me reading the next chapter of the BFG, chapter 22, Capture. And you remember I stopped mid-chapter because it was quite long, so I thought I'd continue it today. Someone asked me, though, how I managed to get the words of the book up on the screen, and I just thought I'd let you know how I did that, because basically Maidenhead Library, you can download at the moment lots of ebooks, and this is what I've got at the moment. This is what we've been reading together, is the ebook, which allows you to follow along screen, and they're really, really good. I'm just looking over here because my son's obviously got a book out. He's been reading Brissinger, and you can read that. This isn't an ebook. This is actually an audio book, so he's been listening to this one. Anyway, a really good place if you do run out of books, because you can still access all the books in the library. You just need to go online. So get one of whoever's looking after you to go online, and you can register, and then you'll be able to read the books or listen to the books if you want to. Right, anyway, let's get back, because remember, they have flown to where the giants are all sleeping. And at the moment, we're not quite sure. Are the soldiers scared, do you think? Would you be scared if you saw 9 giants? I think I would be. Right. So remember, we ended with the head of the Air Force going, "Go forward, men," the head of the army said. "Go forward and do your duty bravely." The soldiers crept forward with their ropes and chains. All of them were trembling mightily. No one dared speak a word. The BFG, with Sophie now sitting on the palm of his hand, stood nearby watching the operation. To give the soldiers their due, they were extremely courageous. There were 6 well-trained, efficient men working on each giant, and within 10 minutes, 8 out of the 9 giants had been trussed up like chickens and were still snoring contentedly. The 9th, who happened to be the flesh lump eater, was causing trouble for the soldiers because he was lying with his right arm tucked underneath his enormous body. It was impossible to tie his wrists and arms together without first getting that arm out from underneath him. Very, very cautiously, the 6 soldiers who were working on the flesh lump eater began to pull at the huge arm, trying to release it. The flesh lump eater opened his tiny, piggy black eyes. "Which of you foul pesters is wiggling my arm?" he bellowed. "Is that you, rotsome man-hugger?" Suddenly he saw the soldiers. In a flash he was sitting up and looked around. He saw more soldiers. With a roar he leapt to his feet. The soldiers, petrified with fear, froze where they were. They had no weapons with them. The head of the army put his jeep into reverse. "Human beings!" the flesh lump eater yelled. "What is all you flush-bunking, rotsome, half-baked beans doing in our country?" He made a grab at a soldier and swept him up in his hand. "I is having early suppers today," he shouted, holding the poor, squirming soldier at arm's length and roaring with laughter. Sophie, standing on the palm of the BFG's hand, was watching, horror-struck. "Do something," she cried. "Quick, before he eats him." "Put that human being down," the BFG shouted. The flesh lump eater turned and stared at the BFG. "What is you doing here with all these grotty twiglets?" he bellowed. "You is making me very suspicious." The BFG made a rush at the flesh lump eater, but the colossal 54-foot-high giant simply knocked him over with a flick of his free arm. At the same time, Sophie fell off the BFG's palm onto the ground. Her mind was racing. She must do something. She must. She remembered the sapphire brooch the Queen had pinned onto her chest. Quickly, she undid it. "I is guzzling you nice and slow," the flesh lump eater was saying to the soldier in his hand. "Then I is guzzling 10 or 20 more of you midgy little maggots down there. You is not getting away from me because I is galloping 50 times faster than you." Sophie ran up behind the flesh lump eater. She was holding the brooch between her fingers. When she was right up close to the great naked hairy legs, she rammed the 3-inch long pin of the brooch as hard as she could into the flesh lump eater's right ankle. It went deep into the flesh and stayed there. The giant gave a roar of pain and jumped high in the air. He dropped the soldier and made a grab for his ankle. The BFG, knowing what a coward the flesh lump eater was, saw his chance. "You is bitten by a snake," he shouted. "I seed it biting you. It was a frightsome poisonous..." I can't even say that. "Poisonous viper. It was a dreadly, dangerous, vine-scream viper." "Save our souls," bellowed the flesh lump eater. "Sound the crumpets. I is bitten by a septuous venomous windscreen viper." Sorry, Willow class, I'm having a fit of giggles today. He flopped to the ground and sat there, howling his head off and clutching his ankle with both hands. His fingers felt the brooch. "The teeth of the deadly viper is still sticking into me," he yelled. "I is feeling the teeth sticking into my anklet." The BFG saw his second chance. "We must be getting those viper teeth out at once," he cried. "Otherwise you is deader than duck soup. I is helping you." The BFG knelt down beside the flesh lump eater. "You must grab your anklet very tight with both hands," he ordered. "That will stop the poisonous juices from the venomous viper going up your leg and into your heart." The flesh lump eater grabbed his ankle with both hands. "Now close your eyes and grittle your teeth and look up to heaven and say your prayers while I is taking out the teeth of the venomous viper," the BFG said. The terrified flesh lump eater did exactly as he was told. The BFG signalled for some rope. A soldier rushed it over to him with both the flesh lump eater's hands gripping his ankle. It was a simple matter for the BFG to tie the ankle and hands together with a tight knot. "I is pulling out the frightsome viper's teeth," the BFG said as he pulled the knot tight. "Do it quickly," shouted the flesh lump eater, "before I is poisoned to death." "There he is," said the BFG, standing up. "You can look now." When the flesh lump eater saw that he was trussed up like a turkey, he gave a yell so loud that the heavens trembled. He rolled and he wriggled, he fought and he figgled, he squirmed and he squiggled, but there was not a thing he could do. "Well done you," Sophie cried. "Well done you," said the BFG, smiling down at the little girl. "You is saving all our lives." "Will you please get that brooch back for me?" Sophie said. "It belongs to the Queen." The BFG pulled the beautiful brooch out of the flesh lump eater's ankle. The flesh lump eater howled. The BFG wiped the pin and handed it back to Sophie. Curiously, not one of the other 8 snoring giants had woken up during this schmizzle. "When you was only sleeping 1 or 2 hours a day, you was sleeping extra doubly deep," the BFG explained. The head of the army and the Air Force drove forward once again in their jeep. "Her Majesty will be very pleased with me," the head of the army said. "I shall probably get a medal. What's the next move?" "Now you is all driving over to my cave to help load up my bottles of dreams," the BFG said. "We can't waste time with that rubbish," the army general said. "It's the Queen's order," Sophie said. She was now back on the BFG's hand. So the 9 jeeps drove across to the BFG's cave and the great dream loading operation began. There were 50,000 jars in all to be loaded up, more than 5,000 to each jeep, and it took over an hour to finish the job. While the soldiers were loading the dreams, the BFG and Sophie disappeared over the mountains on a mysterious errand. When they came back, the BFG had a sack the size of a small horse slung over his shoulder. "What's that you've got in there?" the head of the army demanded to know. "Curiosity is killing the rat," the BFG said, and he turned away from the silly man. Well, he was sure that all this precious dreams had been safely loaded onto the jeeps. The BFG said, "Now he is driving back to the belly poppers and picking up the frightsome giants." The jeeps drove back to the helicopters. The 50,000 dreams were carried carefully, jar by jar, onto the helicopters. The soldiers climbed back on board, but the BFG and Sophie stayed on the ground. Then they all returned to where the 9 giants were lying. It was a fine sight to see them, these great air machines hovering over the trussed-up giants. It was an even finer sight to see the giants being woken up by the terrific thundering of the engines overhead, and the finest sight of all was to observe those 9 hideous brutes squirming and twisting about on the ground like a mass of mighty snakes as they tried to free themselves from their ropes and chains. "I is flush-bunkled," roared the flesh-lump eater. "I is splits-wiggled," yelled the child chewer. "I is swogs-walloped," bellowed the bone cruncher. "I is goose-gruggled," howled the man-hugger. "I is gunsel-wiped," shouted the meat-dripper. "I is fluck-gunkled," screamed the maid-masher. "I is slop-groggled," squawked the gizzard-gulper. "I is crod-squinkled," yowled the blood-bottler. "I is bop-muggered," screeched the butcher-boy. The 9 giant-carrying helicopters each chose a separate giant, and hovering directly over him, very strong steel hawsers with hooks on the ends of them were lowered from the front and rear of each helicopter. The BFG secured the hooks to the giant's chains, one hook near the legs and the other near the arms. Then, very slowly, the giants were winched up into the air, parallel with the ground. The giants roared and bellowed, but there was nothing they could do. The BFG, with Sophie once more resting comfortably in his ear, set off at a gallop for England. The helicopters all banked around and followed after him. It was an amazing spectacle, those 9 helicopters winging through the sky, each with a trusselled-up 54-foot-long giant slung under it. The giants themselves must have found it an interesting experience. They never stopped bellowing, but their howls were drowned by the noise of the engines. When it began to get dark, the helicopters switched on powerful searchlights and trained them onto the galloping giant so as to keep him in sight. They flew right through the night and arrived in England just as dawn was breaking. Thanks for listening, Willow class. And if you get the opportunity, have a go at reading that chapter. It was quite tricky to read, Roald Dahl and his made-up words. Anyway, thanks for listening. Take care.